ancient Israel were a religious people. Like many other ancient peoples, they believed their God went before them into battle. They prayed for God's blessing, built a magnificent temple to house God, and practiced worship and ritual sacrifice in many different ways. Much like many of the other ancient peoples of that time. There were a number of things that distinguished the religion of the ancient Jewish people from others. One of them, of course, was their belief in one God above all. But over time, there was something else that emerged that I think was very unique among ancient faiths, and that is the prophetic tradition that began with Samuel, Prophet Samuel challenging David, Elijah challenging King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, and continued through Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, and others. The Hebrew prophets arose from many different backgrounds, but all of them proclaimed that justice was at the very center of religious practice, right alongside faith and mercy. And all of them boldly and publicly challenged societal and religious practices that failed to recognize injustice and to address it. All religions had and still have priests who bless the power structure and the status quo, but only Judaism, I think, has this ongoing tradition of prophets who challenged it. What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, Isaiah cried out in God's name. Your hands are full of blood. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. And you hear this message again and again in the prophets. You all know what we said together today, what we sang together today, Prophet Micah in chapter 6. You already know, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? Or how about Amos? Amos was really really forceful. I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. I don't know if I would have a congregation if I said stuff like that. Right? Away with the noise of your songs, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a never-failing stream. Those are some strong words. Old Testament scholar James Newsom wrote, each of these texts contains the same basic message. Worship is an idle exercise unless it brings about a changed heart within the worshiper. Formal worship or civil religion that distracts or prevents the people of God from achieving their true calling, lives of justice and compassion, is not worship at all. The words of Amos come across even stronger in a translation by Eugene Peterson called The Message. He puts it this way with more contemporary language. I can't stand your religious meetings. This is God speaking. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your religion projects, your pretentious slogans and goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes. Melissa's not here today. Your public relations and image making. I've had all I can take of your noisy music. Now, he obviously didn't hear Michael Rogers. So he would not put that in there. When was the last time you sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice, oceans of it. I want fairness, rivers of it. That's what I want. That's all I want. James Newsom continues, right worship is worship that understands that beauty and pageantry, loud noises and good feelings are not of value in themselves. They are only of value if they help us, as Isaiah said, to cease to do evil and learn to do good, to seek justice and rescue the oppressed, to defend the orphan and plead for the widow. Both John the Baptist and Jesus continued this prophetic tradition in their ministries. You snakes, you brood of vipers, John cried out in the desert. And of course, we know where that got him. He was beheaded by King Herod, eventually. Jesus called the religious leaders of his own time whitewashed tombstones and echoed the ancient message of Micah very closely in today's reading. You've neglected the weightier matters of the law, the same thing that Micah said, justice and mercy and faith. Justice and mercy and faith. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. These are the things that matter, according to Jesus and the prophets, and they should matter to us too. I think we have a sense in our church communities what it means to walk humbly, to practice our faith through worship and prayer and other spiritual disciplines. We may not do it well, but we have a sense of what that is. We also know pretty well what it means to love mercy, to practice mercy through deeds of kindness, service, and charity toward those in need. All of our churches and our community do that kind of work in very beautiful ways. Justice is a tricky one. What does it look like for us to do justice? And I think it takes a number of different forms. First, when we not only serve those in need or speak up for those who are marginalized, but also walk with them in ways that restore their sense of human dignity, I think that that's a kind of way to practice justice. That's what our youth and youth leaders recently experienced in Nashville at Haywood Street Church. If you were here last week, you heard about that, where they sat at table with people who were struggling with homelessness in a program that was partly run by people struggling with homelessness, restoring their dignity, not just giving them a meal. When we raise our voices in protest against some injustice in our world, that too is a form of doing justice. As a congregation, we have raised our voices in protest many times over the years against mountaintop removal coal mining, against unsafe working conditions on the Henley Street Bridge, and unfair working conditions at a chicken processing plant, against racism, homophobia, and bigotry in many forms. The ancient prophets protested the way things were in their day too. We just heard it. So yes, protest is a way of doing justice, but it often doesn't really change anything. That's the only thing about it. And like worship or charity, protest may just leave us feeling more self-satisfied. Well, we did our part. We went out and said what was bad, what's going wrong, while the social conditions that oppress our neighbors just continue on. Nothing really changes. Prophets tell us that our religious practices are only of value if they help us to do more than pray or offer a handout or even protest some evil in the world around us. We are called, as Isaiah said, to learn how to do good in the world, to seek justice, to rescue the oppressed, to defend the orphan and plead for the widow. Those are very active verbs which imply at least some degree of accomplishing those things, not just pointing toward them. And that's the kind of justice work we're trying to do with other communities of faith here in Knoxville through Justice Knox. That begins each year with house meetings. It'll start happening again in September and October, where we listen to one another, really listen to one another in our local churches and across the community. And the goal of these listening sessions is to uncover issues of injustice in our community and to build a deeper sense of community with one another so that we can stand together to confront those issues. And as we do the listening process, we learn we have more in common across the community than we think. Issues that we may have thought were out there somewhere in somebody else's church or in another part of town, we find in the stories of our own congregation. Or issues that we thought were just here, we learn are the same issues confronting some of our neighbors in another part of town. So we build a sense of community and solidarity with each other so that we can stand together as we discover issues. Many of you will remember that when Justice Knox started a few years ago, it was a story from the McMahon family, from Jay McMahon, that inspired Justice Knox to take on seeking crisis intervention training for police to try to prevent the number of people who were, mentally ill people who were being sent to jail instead of to treatment. Once we choose issues to address together, there's a season of research to learn what's being done in our city and other communities to address issues. As I said, our first year we learned about the crisis intervention training. And to be honest, before we did that, I didn't know. I've been worshiping here, living here, doing ministry in Knoxville for way too many years. And didn't know that 25% of the people in the local jail were people struggling with mental illness. We surface these things, we come to understand what's going on so that we can act to make a difference. Last year we held summits in Knoxville on creating affordable housing for low-income people and using restorative practices in schools rather than suspensions to address behavior issues. Then finally, each spring, we follow the example of Nehemiah and call together a great assembly of 1,000 people or more from our congregations to ask our elected leaders to work with us to make the changes that are needed to solve these kinds of difficult problems in an ongoing way. This form of doing justice is not easy or comfortable. It's not easy to bring together 15 or 20 congregations with different traditions to work with one another. It's not easy to show up for all the team assemblies and research committee meetings where we identify issues and learn what justice might look like in each case. And it's not comfortable challenging reluctant elected leaders to do something new, especially when we like them. I mean, it's not like we're calling them a brood of vipers or whitewashed tombstones. I don't know who said that, but that's really mean, you know? But for church folk, it's still uncomfortable to be confrontation around issues of injustice. Yet we are learning, I am learning, that this is the work of justice, including everyone in the wider community in God's abundance. This is the work of justice to which Jesus and the prophets call us. And we are learning that when we engage in this work, when we genuinely seek to change the things that contradict God's love in the world, which, as someone said, when we genuinely seek to change the things that contradict God's love in the world around us, our worship becomes deeper for me because it's connecting with that work in some way. And our ministries of mercy become more meaningful to me because now I can go and give someone food that they need for that day, knowing that we're working on the bigger problem of why is there food scarcity in some parts of the city and so on. In his letter from a Birmingham jail a long time ago, 1963, Martin Luther King wrote, "I meet young people every day whose disappointment with the church has risen to outright disgust." Voice, another prophetic voice. There was a time when the church was very powerful. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was the thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Things are different now. The contemporary church is so often a weak, ineffectual voice and the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's often vocal sanction of things as they are. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for our time. And I think you might argue that we have seen that unfold over the last 60 years, where more and more people find that the church is irrelevant to their lives. So may we hear the call of the prophets. May we remember the weightier things that matter to God. And may we dare to do the work of justice that is needed in our own time and place.